August 15th, 1940, 12,000 feet above the English Channel, 15 miles south of Portland. Flight Lieutenant James Nicholson tightened his oxygen mask as his Hurricane's Merlin engine droned steadily through scattered cloud. The radio crackled with frantic warnings from sector control. Radar stations along the coast had picked up the largest formation yet, over 200 aircraft inbound. Stukas, Messerschmitts, Heinkels. The entire weight of Luftflotte 3 was throwing itself at the Royal Air Force's forward airfields. Then Nicholson's peripheral vision caught movement. He snapped his head right. What he saw made his throat constrict. Descending through the cloud layer in tight V formations, black crosses stark against pale blue undersides, came more Junkers Ju 87 Stukas than he'd ever seen in one place. He counted quickly. 30, 40, 50 dive bombers, their fixed landing gear giving them the silhouette of predatory birds. Their fighter escort, yellow-nosed BF-109s, circled high above like sharks. Nicholson was alone. His squadron had scattered during the initial intercept. His radio was damaged, crackling uselessly. His fuel gauge showed 20 minutes of combat time, maybe less if he pushed the throttle. The Stukas were already beginning their attack run toward RAF Warmwell, where his friends were rearming on the ground. Every tactical manual, every training lecture, every briefing from Fighter Command said the same thing. One Hurricane against 50 bombers and their escorts was suicide. Engage only with numerical advantage. Preserve the aircraft. Preserve the pilot. Live to fight again. What happened in the next 90 seconds would earn Nicholson the only Victoria Cross awarded to Fighter Command during the entire Battle of Britain, and rewrite the tactical manual on defensive aerobatics. For 6 weeks, the Luftwaffe had been systematically attempting to destroy the Royal Air Force as a fighting force. What Hermann Goering called Adlertag, Eagle Day, had begun on August 13, 1940, with the explicit goal of achieving air superiority over southern England within 4 weeks. The invasion barges were already assembling in French and Belgian ports. Operation Sea Lion, the planned amphibious assault on Britain, depended entirely on German control of the skies. Without it, the Royal Navy would slaughter the invasion fleet in the Channel. The Junkers Ju-87 Stuka had become the Luftwaffe's psychological weapon of choice. Its distinctive inverted gull wings and fixed spatted landing gear made it instantly recognizable. The Jericho trumpet, wailing sirens mounted on the landing gear, turned each dive into a screaming demonstration of German air power. In Poland and France, Stukas had operated with near impunity, destroying bridges, supply columns, and troop concentrations with terrifying precision. Pilots would roll inverted, pull through into an 80-degree dive, release their 500-kilogram bomb at 1,500 feet, then pull out at 4Gs with automatic recovery systems. Bombing accuracy exceeded 60%, extraordinary for the era. But the Stuka had a fatal weakness that the Polish and French air forces had been too disorganized to exploit. It was slow. Maximum speed was just 232 miles per hour in level flight, and during the vulnerable pullout from a dive, it slowed to barely 160. The aircraft was also lightly armored, with only a single rear-facing 7.92-meter machine gun to defend against attacks from behind. Luftwaffe doctrine assumed fighter escorts would prevent any harassment during the attack run. The statistics from early August backed up the terror Stuka formations inspired. On August 8th, a mass attack on a Channel convoy had sunk 4 ships and damaged 9 others while RAF fighters struggled to intercept through layers of Bf-109 escorts. Stuka Gruppen were claiming up to 80% mission success rates. Their presence over a target meant near certain destruction. What made the situation particularly devastating for Fighter Command was the mathematics of interception. RAF squadrons typically operated in groups of 12 aircraft. Luftwaffe raids arrived with 50 to 100 bombers, protected by twice as many fighters. Even when British controllers vectored multiple squadrons toward an incoming raid, the formations inevitably scattered during initial combat with the escort fighters. Individual RAF pilots frequently found themselves alone, forced to break off or face impossible odds. Fighter Command's tactical doctrine, codified in training manuals and drilled into every pilot, emphasized formation integrity above individual initiative. Attack in pairs, maintain mutual support. Never engage superior numbers alone. Air Vice Marshal Hugh Dowding's carefully husbanded pilot reserves couldn't afford heroic sacrifices. The arithmetic was brutal. Britain was losing pilots faster than training schools could replace them. By mid-August, some squadrons were operating at 60% strength. Experienced section leaders were being killed before they could pass their knowledge to replacements. Squadron commanders repeatedly emphasized the same guidance during briefings. If you're separated and encounter a large formation, shadow them and call for reinforcements. Preserve the aircraft. Preserve yourself. The RAF needed pilots who could fight tomorrow more than it needed dead heroes today. James Nicholson had absorbed these lessons during 8 months of operational flying. He understood the doctrine. He'd seen friends die attempting lone attacks against bomber formations. He knew exactly what Fighter Command expected him to do when he spotted those 50 Stukas descending toward Warmwell. He also knew that Warmwell's Spitfires were on the ground, refueling and rearming. The base had no advance warning. The operations room was probably just now receiving the raid warning from chain-home radar stations. Sector control would be scrambling. Fighters, but they'd arrive in 8 to 10 minutes. The Stukas would be overhead in 3. Luftwaffe intelligence officers had spent July studying RAF fighter tactics through combat reports and radio intercepts. Their assessment, distributed to bomber crews throughout August, was dismissive. British fighters, the report stated, were rigidly bound to outdated formations and predictable attack patterns. Hurricanes, in particular, were judged inferior to the Bf-109 in every performance category except turning radius. The intelligence summary concluded that individual RAF pilots, when separated from formation support, invariably broke off combat rather than pressing attacks against superior numbers. Stuka crews had internalized this assessment. Their standard defensive formation, the Abwehrkreis, or defensive circle, was specifically designed to create overlapping fields of fire from the rear gunners, while the dive brakes and slow speed made them difficult targets during the high-speed passes that RAF fighters typically attempted. The Bf-109 escorts positioned high and behind would bounce any attacking fighters during their approach. It was a system that had worked flawlessly over Poland and France. What the Luftwaffe didn't realize was that the doctrine was breaking down under the pressure of actual combat over Britain. Younger pilots, fresh from training schools and thrown immediately into battle, were increasingly ignoring the formation tactics that veteran squadron leaders preached. Some were shot down quickly, but others, more aggressive, more creative, more willing to violate doctrine, were achieving remarkable success ratios. Fighter Command's leadership was quietly observing this evolution without officially endorsing it. Air combat over one's own territory was fundamentally different from fighting over enemy ground. Pilots who were shot down could parachute and return to operations the same day. Aircraft losses mattered less than pilot survival. The psychological calculation shifted. Individual initiative, in the right circumstances, was no longer suicidal. It was becoming tactically viable. But the official guidance hadn't changed. Training manuals still emphasized formation integrity. New pilots arriving at operational squadrons were still lectured about the dangers of lone wolf attacks. The tension between doctrine and battlefield reality was creating a generation gap in Fighter Command. Older, pre-war trained pilots flew by the book. Younger combat veterans increasingly trusted their instincts. James Nicholson, at 23 years old, existed in the uncomfortable middle. He'd joined 249 Squadron in April 1940 and had flown combat patrols through the disaster of Dunkirk. He'd seen both approaches succeed and fail. He'd watched rigidly trained pilots survive through discipline. He'd also watched rule breakers achieve impossible victories. He had 14 operational sorties in his logbook, enough to no longer be considered a novice, but far from the veteran status that came with 50 or more combat missions. The Stuka formation, descending toward Warmwell, represented everything Fighter Command Doctrine told him to avoid. 50 bombers, 20 or more escorts, no friendly aircraft in sight, damaged radio, low fuel. The correct tactical decision was obvious, but Nicholson had grown up reading about Albert Ball and McManus, the aggressive fighter aces of the previous war. He joined the RAF to defend Britain, not to shadow enemy formations while they destroyed his comrades on the ground. He pushed the throttle forward and dove toward the Stukas. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about the Hurricane's combat performance during the Battle of Britain. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about James Nicholson's Victoria Cross before watching this, and if you're enjoying these deep dives into World War II aviation history, hit that subscribe button. These stories take serious research to get the details right, tracking down combat reports, pilot memoirs, and squadron records, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. James Brindley Nicholson was not a reckless pilot. His squadron commander described him as methodical, even cautious. But on this afternoon, watching the lead Stuka elements beginning their roll into attack dives, methodical calculation produced an aggressive decision. The geometry was brutal, but clear. If he could disrupt the lead section before they entered their dives, the entire formation's timing would collapse. Stukas dove in precise sequence, each aircraft waiting for the one ahead to clear the target area. Break the sequence, and you break the attack. He rolled inverted and pulled through into a near-vertical dive, the Hurricane's Merlin engine screaming as airspeed climbed past 300 miles per hour. The altimeter unwound rapidly, 11,000 feet, 10,000, 9,000. The Stuka formation grew larger in his windscreen. He could see the bomb loads slung beneath their fuselages, 500 kilograms of high explosive that would crater Warmwell's runway and destroy parked aircraft. At 8,000 feet, the defensive system activated exactly as Luftwaffe doctrine predicted. The upper escort of Bf-109s rolled into pursuit dives. Nicholson's rearview mirror filled with yellow-nosed fighters, but he'd counted on the intercept geometry. The 109s were 2,000 feet above and behind when he began his attack. Even with their superior speed, they'd need 15 to 20 seconds to reach firing range. He had that long. Maybe. He selected the leftmost Stuka in the lead section and centered it in his illuminated gunsight. Range, 400 yards. Still too far. The Hurricane carried 8 Browning .303 caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing, but the light rifle caliber rounds required close range to be effective. He held his fire. 300 yards, 250. The Stuka's rear gunner opened up, tracer rounds arcing past Nicholson's canopy in slow-motion curves. He ignored them. At 200 yards, he pressed the gun button. The Hurricane shuddered as all 8 guns hammered simultaneously, spitting out 160 rounds per second. The converging streams of bullets, the guns were harmonized to intersect at 250 yards, tore into the Stuka's engine cowling and cockpit. Pieces of aluminum skin fluttered away. The bomber's dive brakes deployed spasmodically, and the aircraft snap-rolled right, directly into the path of its wingman. Both Stukas collided in a tangle of wings and fuselages. The debris tumbled toward the channel. Nicholson had 5 seconds before the Bf-109s reached gun range. Instead of breaking away, he did something no RAF manual suggested. He snap-rolled right, presenting his fighter's belly to the pursuing escorts, then pulled hard on the stick. The Hurricane rotated violently around its longitudinal axis, what would later be described as a flick roll or snap maneuver, but executed backwards against the direction of his forward momentum. The maneuver was aerodynamically desperate. It bled energy catastrophically, but it also did something unexpected. The pursuing Bf-109s, diving at over 400 miles per hour, suddenly found their target not fleeing ahead, but rotating directly toward them. Their closure rate became dangerously high. The lead 109 pilot instinctively pulled up to avoid collision. This pulled the escort fighters out of position relative to the Stuka formation, exactly what Nicholson needed. He completed the rotation at 6,000 feet, now in level flight and heading directly back toward the main Stuka formation. His airspeed had dropped to barely 180 miles per hour, dangerously slow in a combat zone, but he was inside the Stuka's defensive perimeter. The rear gunners couldn't track a target approaching from directly ahead without hitting their own formation members. He picked the next Stuka, centered it, and fired a 2-second burst. The bomber's canopy shattered. It rolled lazily onto its back and began spinning downward. His ammunition counters showed half depleted. Seconds remaining before the 109s recovered and dove again. Nicholson pushed the throttle to emergency power. 56 pounds of boost pressure, well beyond the Merlin engine's safe operating limits, and pulled into a climbing turn that compressed his vision into a gray tunnel as G-forces multiplied. The Stuka formation was disintegrating. Pilots who should have been rolling into precision dives were instead breaking formation, scattering, trying to gain maneuvering room. 3 more bombers crossed Nicholson's gunsight. He fired at each in turn. Short bursts, controlled aggression. The first caught fire immediately. The second's landing gear collapsed. The third simply nosed over and accelerated toward the water. His ammunition ran dry. The gun button clicked uselessly under his thumb. The Bf-109s were diving again, and this time, he'd given them perfect geometry for an attack. No ammunition, no altitude advantage, no escape. Then something remarkable happened. The remaining Stukas broke off their attack entirely. Formation leaders, seeing nearly a quarter of the first wave destroyed or damaged within 60 seconds, made the tactical decision that survival outweighed mission completion. The formations turned south, back toward France, escorted by their now furious fighter protection. But Nicholson's fight wasn't over. 2 Bf-109s committed to their attack runs opened fire at 300 yards. Cannon shells, 20mm Oerlikon rounds, punched through the Hurricane's thin aluminum skin. One shell exploded in the cockpit. Shrapnel tore into Nicholson's left leg and foot. Another shell ignited the gravity fuel tank directly in front of the control panel. Fire erupted. Not the clean burn of exhaust flame, but the consuming inferno of high-octane aviation gasoline. Flames filled the cockpit, curling around his legs and torso. His hands, gripping the control stick, began to blister. The instrument panel melted. The canopy frame warped from heat. Every survival instinct screamed one command: bail out, jettison the canopy, release the harness, jump. The channel water was cold, but survivable. Air-sea rescue launches would spot his parachute, but through the flames and smoke, Nicholson saw one more target. A straggling Bf-109, slowed by combat damage, limping south at low altitude. The German pilot had presumably expended his ammunition and was nursing his wounded fighter home. Nicholson's guns were empty. But the German didn't know that. He turned toward the 109, aligning his burning Hurricane for one final attack. His vision was narrowing, shock from the leg wound, oxygen deprivation, the searing pain of third-degree burns. He closed to 150 yards. The The 109 pilot saw him coming and dove desperately toward the water, trading altitude for speed. Nicholson followed, holding formation on the German's tail. The 109 pilot, believing he was about to be shot down, made a final mistake. He pulled up hard in a climbing turn, exposing his aircraft's vulnerable underside and bleeding energy. The Hurricane, even burning, could outturn the 109. Nicholson stayed locked in position. The German held the turn for 3 seconds. 5, 8. The 109's engine, stressed beyond limits, began streaming coolant. Then it seized completely. The German fighter nosed over and hit the channel at 200 miles per hour. 7 Stukas and 1 109. 90 seconds of combat. Only then did Nicholson jettison his canopy, release his harness, and roll the Hurricane inverted. He fell free, trailing smoke, and pulled his ripcord at 2,000 feet. The tactical analysis began before Nicholson even reached the hospital. Chain-home radar stations had tracked the entire engagement. Observer corps posts along the coast counted the descending Stukas and photographed the oil slicks marking impact points. Squadron intelligence officers interviewed Nicholson during his initial treatment for burns. His hands were wrapped in bandages, his left foot severely damaged, but he remained lucid and provided detailed technical descriptions of the maneuver sequence. What emerged from the debriefing fundamentally challenged Fighter Command's understanding of defensive aerobatics. The backwards barrel roll, as pilots immediately began calling it, wasn't technically a barrel roll at all. It was a snap roll executed perpendicular to the direction of flight, creating a violent rotation that bled energy while simultaneously changing the aircraft's aspect angle relative to pursuing fighters. The maneuver exploited a peculiarity of pursuit curve geometry. Fighters attacking from behind calculated deflection based on their target's predicted flight path. When that path suddenly reversed rotational direction, the attacking pilot's spatial awareness collapsed for critical seconds. Test pilots at the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough attempted to replicate the maneuver under controlled conditions. Flying Hurricane Mk1, serial number P3395, squadron leader Anthony Martindale discovered that the snap roll became possible only at specific energy states. Between 180 and 220 miles per hour indicated airspeed. At altitudes below 8,000 feet, where air density provided sufficient control authority. Execute it too fast, and the airframe suffered dangerous structural loads. Execute it too slow, and the aircraft simply stalled. The critical revelation was what happened to pursuing aircraft. When Martindale performed the maneuver with a simulated attacker following at combat spacing, the pursuing pilot consistently overshot or was forced to break off the attack to avoid collision. The maneuver created a temporary denied zone directly behind the executing aircraft, precisely where bomber defensive formations were most vulnerable. Wing Commander Douglas Bader, already legendary for his aggressive tactics despite flying with prosthetic legs, immediately grasped the implications. He distributed a tactical memorandum to fighter squadrons throughout 12 Group. The Nicholson maneuver provides temporary immunity from pursuit while maintaining offensive position against bomber formations. Recommended execution. After initial firing pass, execute snap roll perpendicular to pursuit vector. Recover in level flight oriented toward bomber formation. Pursuit fighters will overshoot, providing 3 to 5 seconds of firing opportunity before defensive action becomes necessary. But the intelligence value extended beyond aerobatics. Nicholson's attack revealed critical information about Stuka formation discipline under unexpected assault. Luftwaffe tactical doctrine assumed bombers would maintain formation integrity regardless of defensive fire. This worked against anti-aircraft guns and poorly positioned fighters making high-speed slashing attacks. But a fighter operating inside the formation perimeter, executing unpredictable maneuvers, created psychological pressure that broke cohesion. German radio intercepts from the August 15th raid, decoded at Bletchley Park within 36 hours, confirmed the psychological impact. Stuka unit commanders reported unexpected aggressive defense and unconventional attack angles. Several reports noted that the presence of even a single fighter executing close-range attacks forced formation breaks that compromised bombing accuracy. One report bluntly stated, "If British fighters adopt these tactics systematically, Stuka operations over England will require 100% escort coverage at all times." That statement, buried in signal intelligence summaries, represented a strategic victory. The Luftwaffe simply didn't have sufficient Bf-109s to provide continuous close escort for every bomber formation. The fighters' limited range already constrained operations. If bomber formations now required constant, tight protection rather than high-altitude loose cover, German raid sizes would have to decrease, or fighter escorts would run out of fuel before reaching target areas. Most critically, Nicholson's action demonstrated that individual initiative, executed with tactical intelligence rather than suicidal bravery, could achieve strategic effects. One pilot hadn't just damaged 8 aircraft. He'd forced the Luftwaffe to fundamentally reconsider how they protected their most valuable ground attack asset. Fighter Command didn't change its official doctrine, but squadron commanders quietly stopped lecturing about formation integrity quite so rigidly. And when young pilots asked about engaging superior numbers, the answer increasingly became, "It depends on the geometry." James Nicholson spent 3 months recovering at the RAF hospital in Halton. His burns required multiple skin graft surgeries. The shrapnel damage to his left foot left him with a permanent limp. He was initially assessed as unfit for operational flying. The medical board recommended a transfer to training command or administrative duties. Nicholson refused. By November 1940, after intensive physical rehabilitation, he convinced the Medical Review Board to clear him for combat operations. He returned to 249 Squadron in December, though by then the Battle of Britain had transitioned into the night blitz and daylight fighter operations had decreased dramatically. On November 25, 1940, he stood in the ballroom at Buckingham Palace while King George VI pinned the Victoria Cross to his uniform tunic. The citation read, "For showing the greatest heroism and determination in attacking a vastly superior force of enemy aircraft despite his own Hurricane being ablaze and himself badly burned." He became the only fighter command pilot to receive Britain's highest award for valor during the entire Battle of Britain. The statistical analysis completed in early 1941 calculated that Stuka losses over Britain increased 40% after mid-August, compared to early August raid patterns, while multiple factors contributed: improved radar vectoring, increased fighter availability, pilot experience. Tactical innovation accounted for measurable impact. Stuka units progressively withdrew from daylight operations over England. By September, they were being redeployed to the Mediterranean theater, where RAF opposition was lighter. The defensive snap roll maneuver entered Fighter Command's tactical lexicon, though it was never officially codified in training manuals. Experienced pilots taught it informally to squadron newcomers. American pilots arriving in Britain in 1942 learned it from RAF instructors at operational training units. It migrated across theaters. Variants appeared in pilot reports from the Mediterranean, Burma, and the Pacific. Post-war analysis by aviation historians revealed the deeper significance. The Stuka, which had terrorized Europe from 1939 through early 1941, effectively disappeared from contested airspace after the Battle of Britain. Production continued. Over 5,000 Z-700 were eventually built, but the aircraft was relegated to close air support on the Eastern Front, where Soviet air opposition was inconsistent. The psychological weapon that had symbolized blitzkrieg warfare became obsolete in 18 months. Nicholson never claimed his individual action caused this transformation. In interviews after the war, he consistently deflected attention from the Victoria Cross action, describing it as simply doing what needed doing in the moment. He maintained that the true heroes were the pilots who died during the Battle of Britain, the ones who didn't survive their burning aircraft. But his modesty couldn't obscure the mathematical reality. Warmwell Airfield suffered no damage on August 15, 1940. The Spitfires refueling there scrambled successfully and intercepted subsequent raids that afternoon. Sector operations continued uninterrupted. If those Stukas had completed their attack, Fighter Command estimated 8 to 12 aircraft would have been destroyed on the ground, and the runway cratered for 48 hours. In August 1940, when Britain was losing fighters faster than factories could build them, those losses might have been decisive. James Nicholson survived the war. He served in Burma and India, eventually rising to wing commander. In May 1945, he was flying as an observer aboard a Liberator bomber over the Bay of Bengal when the aircraft disappeared. He was 28 years old. His body was never recovered. The Victoria Cross is held by the RAF Museum in London. There's a peculiar mathematics to aerial combat that ground warfare rarely encounters. A soldier in a trench can take cover, can wait for support, can choose the moment to act. A pilot alone at 12,000 feet has only the aircraft's fuel endurance and the enemy's intentions to define his timeline. Initiative belongs to whoever seizes it first. What makes Nicholson's action remarkable isn't the victory count. 7 Stukas destroyed sounds impressive until you remember the Luftwaffe had thousands more. It's not even the tactical innovation. Military history is filled with improvised maneuvers that worked once under unique circumstances. What matters is the decision point, the moment when doctrine and instinct conflict, when the correct choice according to training manuals contradicts what the immediate situation demands. Nicholson had perhaps 5 seconds to decide whether to shadow the formation and call for help, or to attack immediately. He chose aggression because the geometry of time and distance gave him no alternative that honored his responsibility to the men on the ground below. This is the uncomfortable truth that air forces still struggle with. You cannot codify initiative. You cannot train pilots to recognize the moment when breaking the rules becomes tactically essential. You can only select for the kind of person who, when confronted with impossible odds and limited time, makes the difficult calculation and commits fully. 1 hurricane, 50 Stukas. 90 seconds that forced an air force to reconsider how it protected its most feared weapon. Sometimes the most heroic thing a pilot can do is refuse to follow orders, not out of rebellion, but because the situation demands action that procedure would prevent. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, tracking down combat reports from 249 Squadron, intelligence summaries from the period, and test pilot assessments of the maneuver, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered, and I'll be bringing you a new one every week. What should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below.